Hey y'all. So back with another video. Um so I came across this video from Everybody Hates Angel, and I'll do a little quick commentary on it. So let me share my screen. Share screen. Okay, here we go.
I remember watching Goodbye Uncle Tom a few years ago and being completely disgusted by the footage. However, a few things really stood out for me within that movie: the breeding camps and the sexual abuse of slaves. I was shocked once I did a little more research on the topic. The short version of the story was slaves meant money for the master, so the more offspring a woman could bear, the more valuable she was. And in the same context, the more women a man could impregnate, the more valuable he was to the master. As a male slave, you had very little options in terms of jobs. I'm not going to go into the possible job roles, but the options were pretty much outside on the field, around the plantation, doing laborious tasks, or possibly in the house, or if you were lucky enough, a job as a stud. When slave males were around 14, slave masters would inspect the boys to see if they were developed and good candidates to breed the mares. Slave women who were used for breeding were referred to as mares, whilst men were referred to as studs. The slaves used for breeding were seen as cattle, literally treated no different to animals. Boys who were late starters in puberty were seen as useless to the breeding program and had their testicles castrated. Male slaves were expected to successfully impregnate 12 females a year. Female slaves were expected to be constantly pregnant with no reprieve in between.
Did you hear what he said? He said that male slaves were expected to breed minimum of 12 slaves a year. And the female slaves, well, I'm sorry, we should not be saying the word slaves because that was not their choice. Enslaved persons is the more correct term. So the black male enslaved persons were expected to impregnate minimum of 12 black female indentured persons, and the black female enslaved persons were expected to have at least, I think he said, 15 babies a year. So now we're starting to pierce the fog on black people's genetic trauma. And the effects that are going on in the black community today are holdovers from slavery. They're holdovers from slavery. This whole baby mama, baby daddy culture is a holdover from slavery. Genetic trauma is so real. If it's not real, then how do you explain the behaviors of black people today? How did you go from being kings and queens of kingdoms and countries of whatnot to just completely degenerate behavior? How do you explain it? Trauma is really fucking real. And we don't talk about it enough. And this goes back to my video that I made last night. They only see you as You're only valuable to them for breeding and being a work mule, because that's what you were seeing to them as during slavery. Black A black woman's only purpose for a black man during slavery was to breed his babies and go to work. You know how many generations of black enslaved males lived and died, lived and died, lived and died, and they never, their only image of femininity was a non-black woman. That's why they hold a white woman's femininity in such high regard, specifically white women. Because we know that when black men date out, marry out, they choose white women even more than Spanish women and Asian women. They prefer, even they have a preference of a preference. They prefer white women even over Spanish women and Asian women in Middle Eastern and whatnot. So even when they're dealing with their preferences, they still have a preference of their preferences. Okay? When it comes to those races of women, they still, at the end of the day, they prefer that white woman. Because of the genetic trauma that has never been properly dealt with for over 400 plus years now. These men lived and died only knowing that that femininity belonged to a white woman. Because all you ever saw was that white woman being in the house, all dolled up with her hair done and her dress on and smelling good, and she's all clean. That was your first introduction to femininity and womanhood. You never saw a black woman dolled up and being soft and feminine and dainty and smelling good. You didn't even know that was possible. Generation after generation after generation of black men only seeing black women as a breeder and a work mule. We're starting to pierce the fog. The veil is being lifted. Excuse me. Even to this day, black men, a lot of the black men that I've been dealing with, unfortunately, even dating as a millennial woman, they only see any value in me unless I want to have their babies or go in half on the bills with them. Same shit, different toilet. And if you haven't seen that movie Goodbye Uncle Tom, it's very disturbing. Just trigger warning. It's very disturbing, but you need to watch it. You need to watch it. It is a must watch. Must watch. It is a rare film. You can only get it on DVD. You can't stream it anywhere, I don't think, but you need to watch it. I'm gonna rewind real quick.
Male slaves were expected to successfully impregnate 12 females a year. Female slaves were expected to be constantly pregnant with no reprieve in between. Females were ordered to start having children at 13. In order for the master to know how fertile.
He said the female enslaved, the black women that were enslaved were ordered to start having babies as soon as they hit puberty at age 13. I'm sorry, they were not ordered to have 15 babies a year. But as soon as they hit puberty, they were forced to start having babies, which is just awful, awful, awful sexual trauma. Horrible.
How their female slaves were, they would secretly impregnate the females themselves. The plantation owners promised freedom after an enslaved woman had given birth to 15 children. So the majority of female slaves all had a biracial child from the master. Slave masters would travel from plantation to...
So that's where all those biracial enslaved persons came from. Because the slave master would make sure she was fertile by impregnating her first. That's so sad.
Plantation to breed their female slaves with other plantation owners' stronger male slaves in an attempt to breed stronger slaves of their own. If a male slave was considered a stud, then he would receive preferential treatment from the master. I want you to picture this for a moment. A young slave boy saw the better treatment he would receive by successfully impregnating as many women as possible, with no responsibility to care for the offspring he sires, without having to work on the plantation like other male slaves. Picture stables filled with men who were hungrily waiting for the master to throw a woman in his arms, for him to rape and breed, and when he finishes, he's rewarded.
Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that the current Pookie and Ray Ray of today? He feels like, again, the genetic trauma is still being downloaded into black men, feeling that their only job here, they feel like, is to just keep breeding as many women as possible. That trauma has never been dealt with. And that's why we have the Pookies and Ray Rays of today. Just breeding and breeding and breeding these women with just no responsibility, no resources. This is real shit. So sad.
His job. Women were simply his job. Women had as much value as the master placed upon them. They were there for him to impregnate, and that was it. Women were kept in a confinement similar to a pen or a coral, waiting to be chosen by the master. 400 years of conditioning for African American, South American, and Caribbean men. What effect do you think this would have on the men of today? Would this kind of conditioning affect our treatment towards women? Quite a few authorities on slavery believe that this practice conditioned men to be unfaithful and lack an ability to take responsibility for their children. This by no means gives men of color an excuse or justification for an inability to be monogamous or take care of their children, but it does, however, highlight the power of conditioning and the effect of slavery today. I also wanted to think about the converse also being true. The black woman was conditioned to desire to start, since he had better privileges. Some may say they still do today. And for those of you who think that this doesn't play a factor, I want you to think of colorism for a moment. If colorism can still be in effect from slavery in practice today, then this form of slavery, breeding slaves for profit, can be in effect as well. Now, as much as people want to tell us forget about slavery, because it was so long ago, we all know that this is not possible. The effects of chattel slavery are very much still amongst us. And why should we forget the pains of our ancestors? Why should we forget what they went through when we're still going through it today? We're still suffering from the effects now. We shouldn't forget. Not until the conditioning has been reversed. It took a process to brainwash us, and it'll take a process to reverse this. Think about it. Peace, love, and coconut oil. Hey.
So, yeah. Wow. I mean, Angel just broke that down beautifully. Even till today, as you saw, the women were programmed to prefer the studs, i.e. the Pookie and Ray Rays, because they received more privileges. As you see today, a lot of the Pookie and Ray Rays, what are their careers? Mostly in athletics and entertainment. Or, they're the local drug dealer. I mean, it's just like, wow. It's amazing. Black people need to deal with their genetic trauma. Genetic trauma is very, very real. And until you choose to deal with it, you're going to be on a loop. You're going to be stuck on a loop. You got to get off the merry-go-round. Black women, you were not designed to just be a breeder and a work mule for any race of man. There's more to life than just having kids and having a career. I'm just saying, you need to deal with your genetic trauma. Anyways, I just wanted to share that. That's all I got. Until next time, deuces.